All right, very good. Now, we just heard that the World Health Organization has decided to change the name monkeypox, and they're finding an appropriate name because they admit when I heard the monkeypox, that's the first thing. Wow, what a name! But it's refreshing to know that they're working on a new name for that virus. What do you think of that?
I think sometimes you have to laugh.
Uh,
These people are just amazing people. Um, the depth to a certain level, you have to feel sorry for white people. The depth of their ignorance of themselves and the way they behave the way they do. The reason they think in the manner that they do. Somebody has to shock them to say, stop, are you listening to yourself? Does this even make sense? And once they're challenged, you're right, they back out. They begin to say, oh yeah. So, they're just as ignorant and lied to as we are. That's just the truth. A lot of them, they are operating on automatic pilot of ignorance and stupidity about us as Africans, about us as people of African descent. They do not know us. They have all these crazy assumptions. My home in Tennessee, I bought it from a gentleman who was a descendant of a slave owner, and it's a plantation, and he had nowhere to go when we bought the house. So I just told him I didn't need the house either anyway. So I just said, you stay as long as you want. Didn't charge him rent, just stay. He was a human being in need. So they ended up staying for about 3 months. Because of that, we became very close friends because I would stop by the house. I needed things done. And one day he just decided to confess. He was 65 years old. And he said, Arikana, we were calling each other brother and sister now. And we were here, he was teaching me how to tell the difference between different moonshines, because I told him I never seen or tasted moonshine. And of course, Tennessee is well known for its moonshine. So we were sharing and testing moonshine. He said, I need to confess. He said, I've met more interesting Black people but that time it was like 2 months of knowing him. In the 2 months that I've known you, he said, I've known more about Black people in these 2 months that I've known you that I've known for my entire life. He said, we white people, we tell each other lies about what we think you Black people are. He says, I've seen the other side of Black people that I never knew existed.
Look at that.
He went on to say, if somebody had told me in my time of need, a Black woman from Africa would come to my rescue, I never would have believed them. He said, what you have done, he said, what you and your husband, meaning me and my husband, he said, what you did for us, he said, me as a white person, had I been the one who bought the house, I would never have done it to you or to even a white person. He said, if a white person had bought the house, they would have been out. We closed at 2 p.m. They were supposed to be out of the house by 5 p.m. And he said, we had nowhere to go. We would have been on the street. He said, not in my wildest dreams would I have thought a Black woman from Africa would come to my rescue at my worst time of need.
That's very interesting. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting because I know you, so I know better. But people who may not know you, when they hear you speak, they may think you hate white people.
No, we speak truth to power. Even me and him, we had some very good, frank conversations about our views of each other. And in fact, my story with him is a beautiful story of what must transpire between us as a people, as Black people, as white people. I tell you, he had a complete 180-degree turn in terms of his understanding. This house is built, my home is built like an expanded, massive version of Gone with the Wind. And he said, they did the movie Gone with the Wind. They focused on the lives of white people. He said, I feel like they were some rich life, because he grew up hearing stories from his great-grandparents. And he said, let's do a movie that now showcases the reverse of Gone with the Wind. That's how much he had changed. Wow. The day of the auction, he told me, it was the worst day of his life. He said, he told me I am a racist, but I was being a racist out of ignorance. He just flat out told me the truth. He told me himself. He said the day of the auction was the worst day of my life. He said it was bad enough to lose my house to the bank, but to lose it to a Black woman was the ultimate insult. Then he turned around and said, fast forward, this was the same conversation. He said, now I'm so glad that you and your husband got the house, because if a white person had gotten it, we would have been out of that house 3 hours after closing, and we had nowhere to go.
Wow.
We sat down again another time. He had told me, I told him I was going to bring my children to see the house. And he quickly told me that he tell your children that I don't hug. Because, you know, being African, I told the kids we're going to see Uncle Dave and Aunt Carol. And so I said, you can hug Aunt Carol, but you cannot hug Aunt Dave. So, you know, these American kids, they're like, well, why doesn't Uncle Dave want to be hugged? One of my daughters, she's a hugger. So they kind of ambushed him and attacked him from 3 different angles. And they were hugging him and saying, we got you, Uncle Dave. We got you, Uncle Dave. And Carol and I were in the kitchen. We had all this ruckus going on down the hall. And there was Dave on the floor, and the kids were just loving it because they had hugged him. Anyway, wow. Fast forward, we are talking again. And he said, remember what I told you about that I don't hug? He said, what I really meant to tell you was that I don't hug I don't hug Black people. He said, your children were the first Black people I ever hugged.
Wow.
He said, but I'll tell you something else. Because he had lost everything. He was a commercial builder. Because of the recession, he lost everything. He said, for 3 years, I'd forgotten what it meant to laugh. He said, your children brought back laughter into my life.
Okay.
So it was just one thing after the other. He saw another side of us as a people. We did not see a white person. We saw, my husband and I, we saw a person in need, another human being.
That's very important.
$1,000. We said, no, you keep it. If you're struggling to make ends meet, why should I take the $1,000 from you? We said, stay as long as you want. We did not give them a time limit. They left when they were ready and they had a place to go.
Okay. So this is the case of a white person who clearly showed remorse. Do you think, in spite of everything that has happened, as a collective unit, do you think they're remorseful?
I think once they know the truth, a lot of them, they just simply don't know. It was quite interesting to listen to him talk about his own evolution over the 3 months that they stayed at the house. Okay. It was quite remarkable. He was very sincere.
Yeah.
He told me a story when his great-great-grandfather came back from the Civil War. Of course, he was against freeing the slaves. He didn't have a choice. Mm-hmm. He had to tell all his slaves that you can go. Mm-hmm. They all left, but one came back. The one who came back, he went to the wife and says, Mama, I need to come back home. And they said, if it's okay with Papa, you can come back. So Papa said, okay. So he went back into his shack, and he worked for them for over 40 years, never married, never had any children. They would pay him in coins. He would fill up his jars. One guy's full of coins, put it aside, one jar after the other. When he died, instead of giving and wheeling these jars of coins to other Black slaves who had just been freed, he wheeled all the coins back to the master, which meant they had over 40 years of free labor from this former slave.
Wow.
So Dave was telling me the story. He said, we have wondered generation after the generation, why didn't great-grandpa at least share the money with the recently freed slaves?
Yeah.
And then here's the part. He looks at me and he says, my sister, I am so glad you got the house. The money has gone back to the rightful owners.
Oh my goodness, this is a remarkable story. This is a remarkable story. Wow.
He said the money has gone back to the rightful owners because we got the house on auction for much less than it's worth.
Wow. I'm speechless. This is truly remarkable. But in our final 10 to 15 minutes, let me switch to what is ahead in Zimbabwe. There's some exciting stuff happening in Zimbabwe. You're scheduled to go there in a week. Tell us about it.
Now, I got to tell you one little story back to what we were talking about, and it underscores what needs to happen if we're to understand. And I'll come back to Zimbabwe. I'm sitting at the back porch with Dave back at the house, Africa House. And Dev says, Arikana, look in the back. We were just looking at fields in the back. He said, look in the fields. Imagine the white slave master on his horse, or 2 or 3 of them, with their pristine white shirts. Imagine the slaves in their tattered clothes with their hose on their shoulders. And just before that conversation, Dave was getting ready to leave. And he had asked me if he would continue to be my gardener and cut my grass. It's 30 acres, so it's a lot of grass cutting. If he could continue to cut my grass, because they needed to have some income.
You mean the white guy that you bought the house from?
Yes. Okay. He wanted to know if he could come and continue to cut my grass and be my gardener. And I said, okay, I'll think about it. But then he said, now look out there. Imagine the slaves in their tattered clothes and the masters in their pristine shirts, and they're all looking at you and me. He says, I know they are loving what's going on right now. Look at me, a white man. You are the master. You are the owner of the big house. And me, the white man, I'm asking you if I could be your gardener. And you have to.
Wow.
He said, they are watching us. And they are loving.
This is a movie. This is a movie. This is a movie.
I really think it could be a movie, because it was just remarkable, the transformation my brother Dave went through. And when I called him brother, I sincerely meant it. And when he called me sister, he sincerely meant it as well. We just developed a camaraderie and a brotherhood and sisterhood that was genuine and all built out of getting to know and understanding each other. Once Dave understood that he was lied to for 65 years, he changed.
Wow.
And he was just as open as he could be with me to say, my sister, we white people, we do not know you.
My sister, I promise you, we're going to do whatever it takes to get the right people to look at this story. This is a movie. I'm sorry, but this is a movie.